Who is going to win the Premier League? Who will finish second in the Premier League? Who will finish third in the Premier League? Who will finish fourth? And I'm joined by John Mackenzie and JJ Bull. Now, the task is very simple today. John and JJ are coming to predict the full Premier League table for the 24-25 season, and we're going to see where those differences are. Now, very importantly, JJ and John do not know what each other have predicted, so it's going to be a fun day full of events and surprise. Or they're going to pick exactly the same team, and we're about to find out. But where else to start, of course, John and JJ, than with two teams who had quite poor seasons last season, Chelsea and Manchester United, two teams that you would traditionally expect to be up and there, in and about it, in the top four, but neither of them were this season. So if you can, please, will you start, John, by moving Chelsea and Manchester United onto your team, followed by JJ moving them onto the table. How about that? It's a big spinning circle, and Chelsea end up in fourth place. Goodness gracious me. Okay, where's Manchester United going?
Manchester United are going sixth.
Okay, and JJ, how do you differ from this?
Well, not to say I won't change my mind at some point, but here is Man United and here is Chelsea in fifth and sixth.
Okay, it's a little different. Fine. Well, in which case, I think the obvious place to start, John, is with you. Chelsea hopping up there, sixth to fourth. I mean, it's that's an interesting guess. I think some people will find. What's motivated you to put them there?
Yeah, I've been umming and ahhing on Chelsea where to put them. I've got a group of teams between fourth and eighth who I think I could interchange the position on and not be that unhappy with them.
Sure.
I did finally pop Chelsea a little bit higher, despite the fact I am a little bit low on Enzo Maresca, having watched his team play at Leicester, but also in pre-season with Chelsea. But I just think Maresca is a manager who I think he's going to implement a structure. It might be a basic structure. It might not be as impactful as I might expect from a manager right at the top level. I also have issues with his out possession approach because he has been in pre-season at least using a fairly structured man-to-man approach, which I think won't last because it will get found out in the Premier League. But I just keep coming back to the fact that they've just got so many good players and so much of a depth of good players that I just can't. I can see him just implementing a simple structure and that being enough for them to solve those problems. Especially if they do bring in like a centre forward. As soon as you start putting that amount of good players on the pitch with enough basic structure for it to work, I think you're more likely for it to come off than not. So
I think that's what Todd Boehly's hoping for sure.
Yeah. Well, so huge reservations, but I've done it. I've put them there.
I love forcing John Mackenzie to gamble so early on in an episode. JJ, you've put Chelsea in at sixth place, which is where they finished last season, so you're not quite as hot on them.
Well, they have a squad that's worth about £18 billion, loads of great players, so they should finish ahead of lots of other teams because that's what good players do for you. I think you've seen in pre-season, and Maresca's talked about it, they haven't really had a great pre-season because he's not had time to actually work on anything with them properly because they've been playing friendlies in places where they don't have any time to do it.
Every other day.
Yeah, so the issues like John's saying about out of possession stuff, particularly like he wants to change the way they pressed what Pochettino was doing, and that hasn't quite aligned with what the players are doing on the pitch yet, so that's a problem, and they'll find problems with that in the league. I think that one of the big problems, and it sounds quite football man-ish, is that they don't really have on-pitch leaders. Thiago Silva's gone now. I don't know what's happening with Conor Gallagher. Reece James might be injured to the start of the season. They don't really have anyone who's a captain, and I think teams need those players. Like you need water carriers in the team, someone who's not as technically or maybe athletically good as everyone else, but who just gives you something extra and is maybe a bit nuts. I think you need that, and they kind of lack that, which could be an issue.
Okay, fine. You've put Man United above Chelsea, which is rather a jump because Manchester United, of course, had a very poor season last year, finished eighth. We just watched the Community Shield over the weekend. Ten Hag was there as the manager, Casemiro starting in that lineup. I think two things that most fans wouldn't have expected at the end of last season. What's caused this confidence in you to push them to fifth?
Well, Erik ten Hag's Ajax side were very good, and he started signing more of the players that he used to have there. So I think that's going to be a real benefit to him. I just think Man United will be better than last season, even though their numbers last season were horrible. The expected points had them something like 14th in the league.
Yeah.
Their defensive numbers are dreadful. They concede more shots than like any team out apart from Sheffield United last season. They just concede far too many chances. They're far too open. I don't like the way they play out of possession. Don't like the way they play in it. It doesn't make sense at an elite level football. They don't have control of anything, and it's not. You just can't. You can maybe win cups, knockout games, but you can't really, I think, go long term in the league.
This sounds like a great description of why you'd put them at 8th.
Well, I might change my mind later. You never know. But like, they have good players, and watching them play in the Community Shield, they had nice little patterns going on where like up back and throughs and little tight 1-2s.
Yeah.
That looks like they've worked on that. They've brought in new coaches to work with Ten Hag, so you might get better on-pitch play.
There's Lenny Yoro, Matthias de Ligt, Joshua Zirkzee. It sounds like Mazraoui might come if Wan-Bissaka leaves. You know, there are new players.
There are new players, but still the middle of the pitch is probably the weakest part, and it is maybe the most important bit on a football pitch.
Okay, fine. And John, you don't share JJ's confidence. You have suggested an improvement on last season, but not just outside of that top 5.
I think it's the Erik Ten Hag conundrum for me, is that he's now obviously in a precarious position where I think if things don't go well, he'll probably be moved on. And so I think that encourages you as a coach to be more conservative. And I think what we saw at the end of last season, we saw it in the FA Cup final, we saw it in the Community Shield as well, is that they're probably going to just play, I think, a less progressive form of football. What I mean by that is that I think Ten Hag was brought in to make Manchester United move away from playing low block and counter football to being able to do the sorts of things that you expect an elite manager to do, which is being able to press high, able to compact space and control games for longer, and not just relying on transitional moments for a lot of your attacking upside. I think that what we've seen at the end of last season and then beginning of this is that we're going to see a regression. So Manchester United going back towards that more low block and counter approach, which I think will give them better results now. But I think it reduces their ceiling in the long run. So a sixth place
lengthens that transition again.
Low block and counter Man United should be finishing in the top 6. That will be what you expect. But you wouldn't expect them to then challenge for the top of the table. And I think that's the big question in the long run, is that is this Manchester United team always just going to be chasing the high of finishing in the top 6 and almost getting the fans off their back and say, well, we nearly got Champions League football? Or are they going to go through the hard yards and actually have to go through the difficulty of maybe having a few bad seasons where you actually do have progression in terms of the tactics they're playing in order to get higher than they would otherwise? And it's just this is going to be the cycle that continues as long as Manchester United aren't able to accept the difficult tactical decisions that allow you to step up to be an elite team, so I think they'll be fine this season, but I think in the long run, that's not what they don't want to be fine, right? They want to be elite, they want to be good, they want to be the best, they want to be challenging in the top of the table.
Well, brutal assessments all round, very exciting. Now, if you'd like something kinder, you should ask a fan, which is exactly what we did. We sent Ruben Pinder all the way to Wembley to ask Manchester United fans where they thought their team would finish this season. So what happened, Ruben?
Will Man United make the top 4 this season?
Have to be.
No. Let's be optimistic and say yes.
Yes.
Okay. Tentative yes or a confident yes?
Tentative yes.
I think so, yes.
I still think we get it 100% definitely, yeah.
So on a hopeometer, your optimism between 1 and 10 would be where?
I'll put it a solid 8. Solid 8. Solid 8.
I'll say about 8.
I'll be honest, I'll say around a 6.
Let's say 7 or 8.
I mean, compared to the last 10 years, it'd probably be an 8 or a 9, to be fair, with everything going on. So, yeah, pretty optimistic for this season.
9. I think we're ready. I think last season, it was very unfortunate. The injuries, the back line, I mean, we had, God knows how many backline combinations last season. I think this season, hopefully, we'll have a structured backline, and I think that's going to work out really good. We saw it in the cup final when we had a stable backline. Just what Ten Hag can do with his tactics. So I'm very optimistic.
Where is this optimism coming from?
Actually, we've let Ten Hag have his time to develop a squad. He's cut out a lot of the fat, and he's finally buying in players that he clearly wants. I think we've got a lot of passionate players like Johnny Evans, Maguire, McTominay, that these young players can learn a lot from.
The structure that's been brought in behind the scenes, we look to be going in the right way, but I still think we need to get a few more out of the club and get at least 2 or 3 in.
I think Ineos being in's given the right club management, club leadership that we've needed for a long time.
I think if we get the players we're looking at in the next few sort of weeks, we've got a chance. If we don't, I think it might be a bit of the same as last season.
I think we're expecting to push on, and I think we're expecting to get some more players through the door. But we're in August now, the season's starting soon.
Yeah.
Hopefully they won't have the same level of injuries, although at the moment it's not looking so good. I just think there's probably that just renewed optimism.
City first, I think United second. I don't think Liverpool come top 4. I think Arsenal third, and I think Chelsea or Tottenham come 4th.
United second?
Yeah. We have the squad. We just didn't have the them on the field the whole season last season.
Do you think Man United can get a top 4 this season?
Absolutely not. No chance. Lucky if they get top 8.
Very optimistic there from Manchester United fans. But who wouldn't be ahead of a big game, JJ? Now, in the intervening time, you've both moved some extra teams onto your tables there. This section we're calling the Big Spenders section, and it involves the teams of Aston Villa, West Ham, Brighton, and Nottingham Forest. Always big spenders, Nottingham Forest, aren't they? Now, John, let's begin with you. We can see that Aston Villa, you've popped in there 8th, haven't you? Which is a bit of a come down from last season. What's motivated that for you?
Yeah, just a number of different factors. I suppose I think that Villa probably ran a little bit hot last season. I think they were well worth their top 4 finish, but I think their numbers dropped off a little bit towards the end of the season. And I think there'll be other teams now vying for the top 4 who will perform better. We've already talked about Chelsea in that respect. So on top of that, I think with Villa, yes, they've spent a lot of money. I think it's going to take them time for their players to bed in. And yeah, I think that on top of that, they do have Champions League football now as well, which means they are going to be focusing on that more than they would have been in the Conference League like they were last season. So I think that confluence of different factors means that they'll probably run a little bit lower than they did last season.
We saw something similar with Newcastle, didn't we? It happened the season before. JJ, you agree with John. You put Villa in 8th as well.
Yes, exactly the same thing John said. Also, I think basically every team from 4th down to about 10th could finish on the same number of points.
Yeah.
It's kind of impossible to pick them. So just because I have them in 8th doesn't mean they will finish there. That's, to be clear, I don't choose that.
Sure.
So just because I've said they're there, they're not going to be there. You know? Team might take a little bit of time to adjust. And like Douglas Luiz was really important. Like he's a really, really good player. Not having him is a big thing. You can't guarantee Watkins will be as much of a goal scorer again every single season. He might be, which would mean he's a great player, but you can't guarantee it. And I think there's too many other big clubs that have then improved in the summer and should be in the places that Aston Villa were. Like, there's a big chance they took it last season, but this season with Champions League football it'll be a little bit different.
Somewhere that you have differed from John, fairly dramatically here, is West Ham. John's put West Ham in 10th place. You've popped West Ham down in 15th place, which I know is a little bit of a change from before you started the show. I wonder what has caused you to have such a sort of a sudden loss of faith in Julen Lopetegui.
When you look at the first team, even though they've signed loads of players, I still don't think it looks that good.
Right.
I don't think Lopetegui tends to play particularly exciting direct football, and West Ham have been built around being quite direct and counter-attacking for a long time. And so there'll be a bit of transition there, and I think you end up in a midpoint where you're neither attacking nor defensive, nor counter-attacking, nor possession-based, and that becomes a problem. I mean, it might be totally wrong again. I think having Kudus is a massive thing. He's a player, he's like a difference maker. Full crew coming in as the striker on a big long contract should do quite well. But I think what you get from players like Mikel Antonio was what made West Ham quite decent in the last few seasons, that he can then stretch opposition, he can run into channels and give you that option. But Lopetegui will play in a very different way. And I think it'll be a bit of an adjustment that will take time to work.
Okay. You look now kind of sweet on West Ham, although you have actually only put them in 10th place.
I thought I was being fairly conservative.
You thought you were being conservative.
Yeah.
Why would you say that?
Well, I mean, in terms of the players, I have a different opinion to JJ. I think they've got one of the best attacking units in the league from a player point of view. When they brought in Crescencio Somerville, they've got Paqueta, they've got Kudus, they've got Bowen. They brought in Füllkrug as a striker they can aim at. They've got Guido Rodriguez as well. I just think that if you look at the various squads, they're probably like maybe top 5, top 6 in terms of their attacking players.
Wow.
Again, the same sorts of concerns that JJ has about what's this going to look like from a tactical point of view. And you shouldn't read too much into pre-season, of course, but I did note that West Ham have only managed to beat Dagenham and Redbridge in their pre-season run, which is, I suppose a little bit... Yeah, I suppose a decent National League side. No disrespect to them, but it could take a little bit of time for West Ham to get going. And again, the Julen Lopetegui approach doesn't necessarily strike me as either being a West Ham approach or an approach that is going to work with these players. But again, I'm coming down on the side of when you have players of that calibre in the attacking areas, I think even just the fact that you can impose like a basic structure on a team like this will pay dividends. So I still think it'll be good enough for them to finish comfortably mid-table.
Now Brighton JJ, you've kept it the same. You kept it 11th. John, you've hustled them up 2 spots there. Fight it out. Come on, give me a fight.
I think Brighton have made some good signings.
Yeah?
I had a friend,
Tell him.
I was at a friend. I have a friend who was at their most recent pre-season game.
He hasn't got a friend.
One of my many friends was at the Brighton game. He's just out of shot, actually, just laughing with me, yeah. He was at the Brighton game and was super impressed by Mats Wife, who was with Arne Slot last season at Feyenoord, and also Jan Kuba Minter, who's the player that they've signed from Newcastle. The words that I heard were he was better than Kara Mitterma. So, I think that, along with Fabian Hertzler as the new coach, could mean that, and again, Brighton in that situation where they had Europe last season, don't have it this season, I think that might, it might give them a little bit more just to give them
the inverse of Villa.
Yeah. I think so.
Okay, you've played it safe, JJ. You've popped them in at 11th.
Yeah, I think they have really good young players. I think they could easily finish in the top half as well. There's too much to not know about it, so go safe and put them in 11th.
Fair enough,
you never know.
Yeah, I don't mind that. Now, Forest is the last of our big spenders. You've both just kept them in the league. I know you were oscillating between potential relegation, potentially staying up, so let's stay with you, JJ. Why have you gone with 17th in the end?
I don't think they're hugely strong. Like Chris Wood is their top scorer, and I don't know how long he can keep doing that for. I like Morgan Gibbs-White in the middle as a decent player, but I think there's just a little bit that's not perfect with them. There's also a possibility that PSR comes into play and they might have to deal with something later in the season. So that's one of the reasons for that.
Fair. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I mean, Forest, as you said, they've been big spenders in the last few seasons and it hasn't really helped them. So yeah, I'm expecting more of the same from them really in terms of bringing in a few new players, but I'm just not convinced it's going to be enough.
Also, big spending, like Elliot Anderson for 40 million.
Yeah, right,
I mean, there's some toing and froing going on.
Sure, there's big spending and then there's big spending.
Yes.
Yes. I wonder now, though, because we've seen Forest in at 17th, we're going to move on to the next section, which is the promoted sides. Are we going to see a pattern? I mean, last season we saw all promoted teams go straight back down again. I'm wondering if it would be too bold of me to predict that you've both done exactly the same thing, right? Should we? Okay, get your teams in there. So some consensus in that Leicester, the city that producer Chris Hamill is from, but doesn't support the team because they're shit. Is that what you said earlier? They're bottom. You've agreed. You hate them. You think they're the worst. You wish that you want them to be 20th. That's what you've both been. That's what you're both telling the audience here. Why is that? Why is that, John?
There's some suspicion that there may be points deductions. They also seem as though there might be struggling to sign players in the market at the moment. Their pre-season has not gone well as well. So yeah, I think just that confluence of factors means that I'm just expecting things to be tough for them from the off. So
fair, okay. And in the case of Ipswich, JJ, you've gone 19th. John has gone 18th. Is there a reason that you've put Southampton ahead of them?
I think Ipswich have a very strong style of play, and they have got upward momentum. I think they're being safe and buying players that will be good for them. If they do go down, they can come up the next season. And I think they'll do well in some games, but probably just be a little bit short.
Sure.
Whereas Southampton, I just think for randomly, no real reason, even though I'm supposed to be a professional analyst on this, I just feel like they'll be all right somehow.
Probably
have a change of managers around about November, December. That seems like the kind of team that would do that.
Sure.
And then someone else will come in and grab some results, but still not enough.
Who they got? They got Russell Martin.
That's correct.
Is it?
He's doing really well there.
And well, I was going to say, like, it's a toss-up for you, isn't it? Because I think Luton finished in 18th last season, and they had the smaller team, the more exciting young manager. We've got a toss-up between Russell Martin and Kieran McKenna. What's caused you to put Ipswich at 18th?
Similar to last season, in the same way that Vincent Kompany came in up with Burnley and had a fairly idealistic, heavy possession approach, which clearly doesn't work when you're trying to stay in the Premier League with the quality of players that are available to him. I think Southampton were in the same boat where they are going to be playing idealistic football under Russell Martin, and it probably won't suit them in a Premier League relegation battle. Whereas I think with Ipswich, at least, they'll still be able to play in a similar way to the way they played last season and get upside from that. So similar to the way that Luton were able to, still engender a lot of the same kind of ideas that they had in the Premier League, and it sort of got them the better of Burnley in that situation, despite the fact that no one would have thought the ordering would have been that way around, I don't think, at the beginning of the season.
Okay. Well, sad there for the promoted teams, but alas, it's the circle of life. Now, moving on to a couple of teams who are entering a new era I think we think, JJ. New era, John. And that is, of course, Liverpool and Crystal Palace. Of course, now managed by Oliver Glasner.
Yeah, not too exciting on the Liverpool front, but maybe a little bit less exciting on the Palace front.
Well, in which case then, let's begin with Crystal Palace. Why 11th for Palace?
Yeah, it's a tough one, I think, to read a club like Palace, but it's hard to read the performance of a team who get a new manager towards the end of the season and have a quite good run.
Yeah.
Because I think often, especially in the context of Palace, where they've sort of had stodgy managers for a while, and then they bring in a new exciting coach with different ideas. The players clearly responded very well to that, and you're doing that at a point in time when maybe other teams are sort of accepting where they are in the table, and they're sort of cruising towards the end of the season. So
they have lost Elise though. There is a scenario where the transfer window is still ongoing. Like, in theory, they could lose other players.
Of course. So there's a couple of questions. Like, one is to what extent will the players that they lose impact the style that they have? Like, how much of their performances were down to good individual performances, but also like the tactical approach as well. I think giving the Palace squad a new way of playing, I think has obviously revitalised them, but I think teams now will have had time to have a look at Glasner's system and find ways of responding to it. And so the big question for me is what happens when teams do start finding these kind of solutions to that kind of approach. And we've seen it happen from a number of, we see it happen every year, right? You get one team that does quite well, teams find a way of responding, and then the question is how much flexibility is there in Glasner's system then to find counter solutions to that as well. So, which is something I'm a little less buoyant on. So I think they'll still have a really good season, but I think that they'll just finish outside the top half.
Okay, Liverpool from you, JJ. Third, I feel like is the kind of the best that fans would hope for, right? Like for there to be some consistency with what happened with Jurgen Klopp last season. It is a new era, a new manager for the first time in 8-9 seasons. I don't think anyone is expecting them to challenge for the league title this year. But I mean, third, you're fairly confident that there'll be some consistency.
I think it could be third or fourth, maybe even second. You never know. Yeah. I really like what Slot's doing with them. I think it's not a huge change from what was happening before. I mean, there is obviously quite a big difference stylistically. But he's got great players that can do what he'll want to be able to do. And I think it just won't be perfect this year. It'll be a little bit of transition where you're trying to get them to play the way you want to play. And you've seen in pre-season, there's been a few instances where playing out from the back especially have been problematic, but that'll just come with time. Same as like with Chelsea and United as well, it would just come with time. But they should find them, they've got really good players. They still have, if you look at the spine of the squad, you've got Alisson's probably the best goalie in the league, you've got Van Dijk, still the best centre-back. You've got Mo Salah's one of the best players in the world still, and then in the midfield you've got some pretty decent players there that give you a good level. The one thing they're missing, as I'm sure everyone knows, is like that number 6 that can play through the thirds that Slot likes. It was Matt Weaver really, wasn't it, at Feyenoord. So if they sign someone like Martin Zubimendi, it'll make a big difference to how they build, but I think they'll be okay anyway without it.
It seems as though you're in broad agreement with JJ, John.
Yeah, although I would say the best centre-back in the Premier League is William Saliba right now, so there you go. Yeah, I was really disappointed we weren't going to get to see Roberto De Zerbi at a top club this season, but I think we're going to get a really close approximation with Arne Slot's Liverpool. Similar sorts of ideas, baiting the opposition forward, finding space in behind. And I think it will work well at first in the same way that I think we may see the same sort of trajectory that we saw with Roberto De Zerbi at Brighton, where he gets a lot of upside in the first season, and then in the second season you have problems that start showing because teams just refuse to accept being baited. And I think the big question with Liverpool is going to be like, how long will it take for that transition to happen and teams start sinking deeper, and then us having to see what Slot can do with breaking down low blocks, and whether or not having a better base of player actually changes that. Because I think with Brighton, when it happened, you're suddenly coming up against low blocks, you're in danger of being countered on. They had Billy Gilmore and Pascal Gross as their two central midfielders. It's much harder to defend counters and with the players of that kind of calibre. Liverpool will be able to offset that a little bit. And obviously breaking down a low block is much easier when you have a higher calibre of player as well. So I think Liverpool will be better at it than Brighton, but the big question is going to be like, how consistent can they be at the top level? Will they be able to mount a title challenge?
Okay, thanks, John. Now, in the background, JJ presciently has moved a couple of teams onto his board, because the next section that we're moving on to is teams that are about to take the next step in their existing but relatively new development. Tottenham Hotspur, Newcastle United. JJ, you've got Tottenham in at 4th there, which is quite exciting, I think, for Spurs fans. John's moved his on as well. John in 5th for Spurs, but let's start with you. Why are you so hot on Spurs?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. If you look at the spine of their team, they've got one of the best goalkeepers in the league, I would say. They've got a really good centre-back partnership, really strong full-backs. The midfield may be the weakest part, but then you've got Son Heung-min up top. And the way that Postecoglou plays suits the new signing Dominic Solanke, who should fit right in as well. But also, Postecoglou's talked about he thinks it takes about a year for his team to really learn all his ideas. So he brings in some of it early and then works on it. And then the second season, you see the real benefits of it. And we saw that kind of at Celtic.
Yeah.
So I think this will be, they need to start well for it to work. If they start badly, then I think it'll all start to go wrong, there's a little momentum. But if they start well, I think this could be semi-decent for them, as they've got a good, strong squad with great players.
Yeah, and I had Chelsea and Spurs interchangeable in my head. It's only recently where I've got the order the other way around. I think with Spurs, what you get is a very binary team. I don't worry about Spurs going forward, really. I think, especially now they brought in Dom Solanke, I think he'll do the same kind of job that Richarlison did, but obviously blighted by injury, his performances last season. I think Solanke will do the same thing, but will be available for most of the season. I think that is sort of level changer for them.
You worry about them at defensive free kicks, don't you? That's a little tip I told you about in the lift.
That's right, yeah. You were telling me that when you were watching...
I was telling John that I was watching Spurs, and there was something to do with free kicks. I can't remember what it was. What did I say again, John?
Yeah, you said that when you were watching the Bayern pre-season game,
That's
there
right.
was a couple of goals conceded from defensive set pieces.
Doesn't like set-piece coaches.
It's a big worry because I think with Postecoglou, what you get is a really idealistic view of we're going to play to attack, we're going to score more goals than the opposition. But I think what we've seen in his time is that a number of things, teams, as we've been saying all the way through, in the Premier League, the tactical level is super high. Analysts are always going to find weaknesses and exploit them. And with Spurs, it's such an obvious weakness, just conceding from set pieces, that I can't get my head around the fact that it seems as though, and it could, it could just be, an oratorical device from him to be like, we don't worry about these kind of things. But I don't understand why he wouldn't just bring in a set piece coach and do the other stuff as well, right? But yeah, defensively as well, I've had my reservations about how they're so aggressive in possession. That their rest defence is sometimes a little bit more open than you would expect in the Premier League as well.
Sure, yeah.
So, for me, the difference between Chelsea and Spurs is that, I think Chelsea will probably be less interesting from a tactical view, but maybe a little bit more well-rounded, with the caveat that I am a little bit low on Maresca, especially defensively, interestingly enough, because he's going with a really sort of tight man-to-man system as things stand, which I don't think can last. But I think that Spurs will just be so... binary, they'll attack well, sometimes they'll defend terribly.
Yeah.
That it's for me, it just comes down to, I think that more likely than not, Chelsea will probably edge ahead of them, but it's very close. I wouldn't be surprised to see Spurs finish in the top 4. Wouldn't be surprised to see them finish a little bit lower. So
okay, very exciting, isn't it? It's very exciting. Newcastle, let's go before we finish some of the other teams. You both put them in 7th place, JJ.
Well, have we though? Because I'm going to do something.
Are you going to move? Are you moving things around?
Yeah, I'm going to move them there.
Oh my God. Okay, so what's happened in your brain in the last couple of seconds that's caused that? Because, John wasn't talking about either of those teams, so it's not related to him. What was happening for you?
Well, a big problem throughout my life has been making decisions.
Right.
And so I have to constantly overthink everything. And I've done that again today here live in front of the camera.
Yeah.
I'm basically thinking off... I don't think they've massively improved their squad now, really, the first team anyway. And that middle of the pitch is going to be an issue. And then thinking about how they lined up out of possession against City and how I can work out ways to cause that problems. And so I think people who actually know what they're talking about can definitely do it. And Newcastle don't have European football. They're going to have momentum. They're going to really be going for that kind of place. And I think that just helps teams. Then they can have consistency every single week, lots of training days in between, rest days as well. Which might give them an advantage.
How about it? There we go. I mean, a wild change there. John, Newcastle, you, in comparison to JJ's optimistic nature, and it's less certain to me whether that was related to Man United or specifically Newcastle, 7th, but I mean, still a fine finish for Newcastle.
Yeah, I think Newcastle are going to be interesting because no European football, and because, they play such an intense style of football that being able to train to a, 2-game week rather than a 3-game week, which is what the European teams will be doing, will help them a huge amount.
It's massive, right? You get
I could see, I could see them finishing ahead of Man United here. I could also see them finishing below Villa. I think with Villa, again, it's the opposite thing, right? It's like they are going to be working to a 3-game week a lot of the time.
So diplomatic, both of you.
Well, I swapped Villa and Newcastle around constantly and had them kind of paired together because I thought that would be kind of what it is.
Yeah.
Like, based on like even the squad, the spine thing. Like I was talking to John earlier, like they have one of the best number 6s, which is one of the most important positions in the entire of football. Guimaraes, and they have one of the best strikers in the league in Isak as well.
Yeah.
And Gordon is really decent. They've got they're missing something on the right wing, I think, still. But then their defensive record a couple of seasons ago was phenomenal. So it depends how they play this season. Eddie Howe says he wants to evolve them a little bit and change them. I don't know what that's going to look like yet, but
I think for me, Howe needs to make the sort of Jurgen Klopp evolution that he made when he came into the league. I think, not to say they're exactly the same, but I think that Klopp was able to develop more in possession ideas, which made them more well-rounded. And I think that's the problem with Newcastle is going to be, if they do lean into this just sort of mainly out of possession first team, how sustainable is that going to be? I think it'll be fine in a season like this, but in the long run, they need to adapt.
I totally agree. The other thing with Klopp was he adapted it by bringing in real superstar players each season that helped him do that, and Newcastle haven't done that yet.
They've had an interesting.
So I might move them back.
Yeah, I was going to say they've had a patchy summer, some changes at the top as well. I mean, I think I wonder, but I'm interested to see. Okay, fine. The next section before we get on to who you guys think is going to win the league is titled "All the Other Teams That Aren't Going to Win the League," assuming that Everton, Bournemouth, Brentford, and Wolves don't occupy either of your 1 or 2 positions.
And Fulham as well, actually.
I think they're there. I think
they're there.
They'll be decent, but
you're going big on Bournemouth.
No, I don't know.
Who's going in 10th for you?
Brentford. He's going to put Brentford in.
Oh, is he?
The teams are in. Wow. Okay. So what I'm looking at here, there's nowhere else to start, JJ Ball, than Wolves in 10th. Now, I was a fan of Wolves. I wanted them reintroduced to your native homeland of Scotland.
And you were raised by them.
That's true. But I would never expect them to finish 10th this season. What causes that aberration?
I quite like what the first team looks like.
Yeah.
Even though their underlying numbers last season weren't good.
And they just lost one of their good ones.
Yeah, Pedro Neto, but he was injured for a lot of last season as well. I mean, he is really important. I can't suss out whether Gary O'Neill is a good manager or not yet.
Right.
I think some things make him look like he's doing a very good job. Other things, like trying to show how he beat certain teams on TV, is an odd choice of way to show how good you are. But
I think it would be better to hire a professional pickpocket and,
I think
just hang around a party.
Hire a clown to teach you that you just have to believe in yourself.
That's right. Yeah.
By making balloon animals.
Yeah.
And Gary O'Neill gets a pre-season this time, which he didn't get last season.
Sure.
So it could be that makes a huge difference, because I think any manager needs a whole pre-season to really get your team going. So I'm going to give them that. But I like some of their first-team players. They have good, like Josie Sa's a good goalkeeper, Nouri's a good left back. They've got some decent ones in there.
Of your other teams, I mean, we've got Brentford, West Ham, Fulham, Everton. They're all sort of there between 13th and 16th. Anything specific to say?
No, it's just a randomiser. They can really go anywhere.
Fine.
Brentford are missing their set-piece coach, who made them score most of their goals. So that is interesting.
They haven't gone to Chelsea, right?
Yeah, that's right, and they haven't, I don't think their first team looks strong, but they'll be fine, because I think Thomas Frank's a decent manager and gets results. Damn it, he gets results.
Yeah.
Everton, I think, have made some signings that don't look hugely exciting, but I think Sean Dyche usually turns teams in the bottom end of the table to be real fighters, and that does still count for a lot in the Premier League.
Sure.
And so they'll get results, draws, and 1-0 wins where you need to, and they're really set-piece heavy.
Yeah.
So I think that'll really benefit them. But they also massively underperformed expected goals last season, mostly because Dominic Calvert-Lewin forgot how to shoot.
Who's still there?
He's still there.
May well have left over the summer.
And maybe he'll find out that it wasn't the magic boots he needed, it was just to believe in himself all along.
Yeah. Back to balloon animals. Now, John, the highest we've got here from you is Fulham. Oh no, Bournemouth, sorry, in 12th place. We know you're a big Bournemouth fan. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, a bit disappointed having them a bit lower. They were my dark horse.
You couldn't find anywhere above, because the first and second are available.
It's true. I would love to see Bournemouth finishing first or second. I'm sure many neutral fans would, but I'm not sure it's going to happen, especially because they've lost Dom Solanke, who was obviously a big part of why they did so well last season. But I have been watching their pre-season. They've been pretty good, so I wouldn't be surprised if they do creep up towards the top half.
Who's
but
scoring their goals in place of Solanke? Because he scored a number last season.
yeah,
A high number.
Well, I mean, the players that they've got a number of exciting attacking players. They've got Justin Kluivert is there. They've got Antoine Semenyo as well. Luis Sinisterra scored a few, but has injury issues. And then they've got Enes Ünal as well, who's the guy they brought in as a backup to Solanke. I think they'll probably try and get someone ahead of him to replace Solanke. Obviously, you've got a lot of money to play with there, so it'll be interesting to see if they bring anyone in towards the end of the window. But okay. I still think it's, he's such an important player. You don't just replace that kind of player, especially if you're a team like Bournemouth, because it's not like you just sell a player like Solanke and then just buy the next Dom Solanke, right? It's going to...
Sure, unless you're Brighton.
Yeah, but even still with Brighton, I think you would not necessarily expect it to be an immediate replacement, right? So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they do. I think they'll be good.
Okay, Everton you've put at the sort of bottom of this group in 16th. You don't quite share the same Sean Dyche-related security as JJ.
Yeah, look, the Premier League's super tough. But part of the reason why we've got all three promoted teams to go straight down is because there is a gap between, I think, the teams coming up from the Championship in the last few seasons and the teams above them. What's happening with these teams is they are consolidating, they are getting better, but what that is doing is adding a gap between the Championship and the Premier League, rather than meaning that they're going to start jumping up higher in the Premier League. So, I think Everton, there's possibilities of them getting further points deductions, and there is obviously the off-field stuff for Everton, which is still rumbling on. I think Dyche will do an okay job with them, but I just think that, they'll still be there and thereabouts. They're going to have to... They are a relegation candidate, even though I do think that they will stay up.
Just going to do something quickly. There we go.
Oh, no, just moving things around.
That's fine.
West Ham jumping up there, making irrelevant the whole part of the earlier video.
They're really good, yeah.
Now, John, Wolves, and I don't know if we should anticipate a change from JJ. Wolves, you've put in 15th there. You certainly don't share JJ's ambition for Wolves. Why is that?
I just think this is the season where Gary O'Neill's overperformance of XG will catch up with him.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, I think
what a thing to say.
The underlying numbers have never been great for him, but
right.
I think this might be the season where, having, as we've already mentioned, losing Pedro Neto, for example.
Sure.
I think that they could struggle playing low block countery stuff with one less countery guy, despite his injury woes.
The Premier League is tough, isn't it? Like a dry piece of gristle. It's a tough old chew. Now, all that's left for us to do, JJ Bull, John Mackenzie, is to predict 1 and 2. Oh, it was all building up to this. The most exciting and yet strangely the most boring part of the Premier League. You think Arsenal, you think Manchester City. Let me tell you, history sides with you. But I feel akin. I feel like this must be the year, John.
Yeah, I think so.
This is the opportunity, right? This is it now.
Yeah, I think this is what it's all been building towards. We've seen Man City not make huge moves in the market. Looks like they may be relying on some of their youngsters to come through, which I think will be good for them in the long run. But I also think that what's happened in the last 3 seasons is that Man City have gone from being the best team out of possession in the world to Arsenal being the team who are best out of possession in the world. And to an extent that Man City, I think, now have big problems defensively. And I think it just makes it so much harder to be as consistent as City have been in the last few seasons when they don't have that consistency. Now, obviously, Arsenal have other questions about them. We've talked all season long last season about their some of the in-possession weaknesses they have, high reliance on the right-hand side, some of the ways that they construct their build-up. Also, they're super reliant on set pieces. We talked about that a lot. And so the question is, can they retain their efficiency from set pieces? I think they scored 2 goals against Lyon in their most recent pre-season friendly, which suggests they probably are going to be good in that respect. So I think this is it. I don't think necessarily Arsenal will improve a huge amount versus last season. I think they will improve, but not to an extent that if City were playing at the level that we've seen them play in the last 10 years, that might necessarily topple them. But I think we've just seen a bit of a decline with Man City. I was talking at the end of last season about how it does feel different, the Man City squad. They've had in the transfer market, they've brought in players who they just haven't been able to bed. Calvin Phillips, Mateus Nunes, Kovacic seems to have settled a little bit more, but those are the sorts of misses that they just didn't used to make, and now they have. So I think on the basis of momentum, I'm just going, this is going to be the season that Arsenal managed to do it.
Well, it's a very light transfer season so far in terms of incomings for both both teams. Arsenal just signing Ricardo Calafiore so far. Manchester City signing Savinho. Arsenal have some outgoings as well. But you don't think, again, you think they're not going to quite pip City?
Well, here's the thing. So, like last season, I think expected points, Arsenal were top with 76.45. I don't know how that works with the expected points, but I mean, how can you get 0.45?
Sure.
It doesn't make sense. However, Man City had 71.92. Again, what does that mean? But so that's Arsenal should probably have finished first based on underlying numbers, but that's not really what it is. What you need is a bit of experience getting over the line, which is very hard to do. Guardiola has only not won the league 3 times he's been the manager. One was to like the greatest ever Real Madrid side, basically who broke all the records. Another one was his first season at Manchester City before he bought all the fullbacks. And the third one was during COVID when Liverpool won it. And I think there's sometimes you forget how good players or managers are just because they're still going and still alive and in their prime. And he is probably the greatest manager of all time ever. And I suspect he probably knows what he's doing. They have young players coming through that will do well. I think they're probably at a transitional stage with some of them, players like De Bruyne especially, but I think that's probably just strategy and waiting for a year before certain players like Florian Wirtz become available so they can sign them and replace them long term. And that's probably where you're at. I think.
I mean, it's the most transitional season I can remember for Manchester
Well,
City.
who's the pressure on? It's on Arsenal again.
Yeah.
So they're going to try and do it. I don't know how long Mikel Arteta can keep doing all these things. I think Arsenal and Man City should share top place, so I'm going to put them both in number one because I think easily either one could do it.
Yeah.
I think this is their opportunity now, and if it weren't for Guardiola still being there, it would be Arsenal's year.
Would it change anything for you, John, if, let's say, Manchester City in the next week or two spend some of that Julian Alvarez money and bring in a player like Eze, for example, or any random really good additional
They brought in someone
player.
like Bruno Guimaraes, then yes, I would probably change my mind a little bit.
Right. Which it doesn't seem like they're going to.
No, it doesn't seem that way for whatever reason. But I would say the other thing with Arsenal is that it feels as though when a team plays as intensely out of possession as they do, you get a very short window for that squad before you then start getting burnout.
Well, and very few replenishments to speak of so far.
Yeah, and we've talked about Arteta's failure to rotate the squad as much as, for example, Pep Guardiola. So
there was a hard F on that failure, wasn't there? Failure.
But I think that's what I guess I'm most interested in. If this Arsenal squad, as JJ says, starts getting injury, then you worry about them, particularly players like Martin Odegaard, who Arteta has been able to rely on for a number of seasons now. I think you take him out of that team and they're so reliant on him in so many different phases of play. He's been dropping deep and helping out and build up. He's a progressive player, and then he's obviously a creative player in the final third, and he scores important goals as well. I think if you lose a player like that, then that could severely dent Arsenal's ability to win the title as well. So again, I could see this. I mean, the smart thing to do is to go for City because that's what history tells us to do. But I've just got a feeling that if Arsenal can avoid those things and they can retain the really high level of out of possession approach that they have on top of being able to score, which is the difficult thing to do, to be so good out of possession and be a dangerous attacking team, then I think they probably take the edge over City right now for me.
And they'll be laser focused. And I think if you're purely motivated to really aspire to get to this next level, that's something they have that Man City don't because they've already done it all. So whereas Arsenal are probably maybe at the peak of their cycle where they'll have to start replacing and adding whatever, City have kind of hit the top of one of theirs and they're starting a new one with young players and they haven't even built on it. So there is like a sense of changing of the guard-ish, but not really still. I mean, like the same way the thing with injuries is that it can happen to anyone. Like any of these teams could be absolutely gubbed by it.
Yeah.
And City lose Rodri, Haaland, and that's your...
You could be injured.
They sort of did
injured
lose.
now, yeah.
They lost De Bruyne and Haaland a little bit last season, so maybe that was a chance that
and they still won the league.
Still won the league.
Imagine that.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and Rafa Honigstein. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.